The story centers on a family that finds itself mysteriously imprisoned inside its own home. Every attempt to get outside fails, and no matter how hard they try, there seems to be absolutely no way through the doors or windows. At first, they assume the situation will only last a short while, but days begin piling up, those days turn into months, and eventually the family realizes they may be stuck there for years, which raises the obvious question. How can several people possibly survive inside one ordinary house for that long? And more importantly, what exactly is preventing them from leaving? That mystery becomes the heart of the film. The movie begins with an unusual quote questioning why our planet is called Earth when so much of it is actually covered by ocean. From there, we meet Jason, a local man spending some time fishing near the neighborhood dock. He manages to catch a small fish, but after taking a closer look, he decides it hasn't grown enough and tosses it back into the water. While he's putting away his gear, dark weather starts moving in and the first signs of a storm appear. Jason says goodbye to a friend nearby and starts making his way home before the conditions get worse. He lives in a quiet little residential area occupied by only a handful of families. Most of the neighbors aren't especially close and generally keep to themselves. As the rain becomes stronger, people around the neighborhood hurry indoors. When Jason reaches his house, the first strange problem appears. He presses the garage opener, but the garage door doesn't move at all. After trying again without success, he gives up and leaves his vehicle parked outside. Once he enters the house, we also get a clearer picture of his personal situation. Jason has been out of work, and the family's finances are becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Money is already tight, meaning they aren't exactly prepared for another major problem. His dog, Carrie, happily welcomes him inside. Jason then goes upstairs and joins his wife, Danny Daniels, along with their 2 children, Gary and Ruth. He has brought donuts home for everyone, which immediately lifts the mood, and the kids are especially excited about the surprise. That pleasant moment doesn't last very long. Soon afterward, the family notices that their internet and network connection have completely disappeared. Danny uses the opportunity to bring up something she's apparently mentioned many times before. She wants them to move out of the house. From her perspective, the place is falling apart. One of her biggest concerns is the chimney, which looks unstable enough that it could come crashing down someday. She tells Jason they can't continue living in a property that's constantly giving them problems. Before that conversation can go much further, Gary and Ruth remind their parents that they were supposed to go out and buy a Christmas tree. So everyone gets ready to leave. Jason reaches the front entrance and tries opening the door, only to discover that it won't move. At first, he assumes the lock or frame has simply jammed. But when several attempts fail, he begins checking the rest of the house. He tries another door, nothing, then another, still nothing. Jason moves to the windows, thinking there must at least be another route outside, but every window appears to be sealed as tightly as the doors. Now seriously concerned, he grabs something heavy and starts striking the front door, hoping brute force will break it open. Instead, the door doesn't even seem damaged. The blows leave practically no visible effect. He then attacks one of the windows. Again, nothing happens. The glass refuses to crack. At this point, the family realizes they aren't dealing with a normal mechanical problem. Something has physically sealed their entire house. And things become even stranger when they look outside. Across the neighborhood, other families are having exactly the same problem. Their neighbors are also trapped behind doors and windows that refuse to open. Every home appears to have been locked from the outside by some force no one can see or understand. There is one exception. Their neighbor, Ava Adams, happened to already be outdoors when the phenomenon started. Realizing everyone else is stuck, Ava immediately runs off in search of help. The trapped families watch her leave with a sense of relief. At least one person made it outside, which means there is still a chance she can contact authorities or bring someone back. Even so, nobody can make sense of what has happened. Nothing about the situation feels possible. With no immediate solution, Jason and his family eventually stop trying to force their way out and begin discussing what might happen next. The conversation turns toward their neighbors, including one man nearby who owns a boat. Trying to keep things light, they joke that once this bizarre situation is finally over, everyone should take the boat out and celebrate with one huge party. Across the street, the Richardson family has also started adapting. Since nobody can physically reach anyone else, the neighbors communicate through their windows by holding up written messages. Naturally, theories start spreading. Maybe the government is responsible, maybe it's some kind of experiment, or perhaps, as someone suggests, aliens are involved. Jason doesn't have any answers either. In fact, another possibility starts bothering him even more. What if their neighborhood isn't the only place affected? For all they know, this could be happening everywhere. He starts wondering whether people across the entire world may have suddenly found themselves sealed inside their homes. That night, Jason gathers his wife and children together and tries to calm everyone down. Whatever is happening, he tells them they'll face it as a family and figure out a way to survive. Ruth believes the storm must have caused everything. The strange imprisonment began around the same time as the heavy rain, so to her, the connection seems obvious. Jason isn't convinced. He tells her it could have simply been a regular storm and that they shouldn't immediately assume the weather is responsible. Dani, meanwhile, has another concern weighing heavily on her: her parents. She has no way to contact them and no idea whether they are safe. Jason tries reassuring her by pointing toward the Richardson house. Their neighbors across the street seem unharmed, so he tells Dani there's a good chance her parents are safe inside their own home as well. Then Jason reveals something she didn't know about. He has secretly purchased a handgun. Jason explains that he bought the weapon for protection, thinking it might someday be useful if the family ever faced a serious emergency. Considering what is happening now, he clearly believes that emergency may have arrived. By the following morning, Jason still hasn't given up on escaping. He goes back to the front entrance and makes another attempt to break through. This time, however, he notices something he hadn't properly recognized the day before. Rainwater has collected all around the outside of the house. And wherever that water has touched the structure, the surface seems to have become completely sealed. Jason begins putting the pieces together. He explains his theory to Dani. Maybe the storm really is connected after all. Somehow, the rain appears to have formed an invisible barrier around the entire building. Anything covered by it becomes impossible to open, break, or pass through. They still don't know how such a thing could exist, but for the moment, it's the only explanation that seems to fit what they're seeing. Later, the whole family gathers around the table for a meal. Now that the initial panic has passed, they have to confront a much more practical problem: survival. Nobody knows how long this strange confinement will last, and waiting for outside help without making a plan could become dangerous very quickly. Jason tries to keep everyone's mood from sinking too far. He brings out the music and movie collection the family has accumulated over the years, hoping they'll at least have some entertainment while they're stuck indoors. Unfortunately, when they actually go through everything, they realize their options are incredibly limited. They only own 2 movies. With entertainment handled as well as it can be, the family begins counting their essential supplies. Food is the biggest concern. After checking what they have stored in the kitchen and around the house, they estimate that their current supply could last roughly 2 months if they're careful. That gives them some breathing room, but not much. They also realize they'll have to start rationing other resources immediately. Water can no longer be wasted. Electricity has to be treated the same way, because if either utility suddenly stops working, there is no guarantee anyone will be able to repair it from outside. And if the family really is trapped for longer than expected, every bit of food, water, and power they have could eventually become the difference between surviving and running out of options. Sometime later, Jason decides the kids need to start learning skills that might actually matter if their situation becomes permanent. He shows Ruth and Gary how to properly clean a fish and prepare it for cooking. For the children, it feels more like an activity than a survival lesson, and they genuinely enjoy helping their father. A full week passes. One evening, while Jason and Dani are putting dinner on the table, Dani brings up another idea for stretching their supplies. She has found some seeds in the house and wants to use them to grow vegetables indoors. If they can somehow create their own food, even on a small scale, it could eventually become extremely important. Later that night, Jason communicates with Richardson through the window. During their conversation, Jason discovers that Richardson works as a dentist, but that information quickly becomes irrelevant when Richardson reveals something much more serious. His family has already run out of food. Jason can see how desperate the situation is becoming across the street, and it hits him hard because there is absolutely nothing he can do. Even though the 2 houses are only a short distance apart, the invisible barrier separating them makes helping his neighbor impossible. Another 2 weeks go by. The family continues trying to create some sense of normal life inside the house. Jason dances around with the children, making them laugh and helping them forget their circumstances for a little while. They invent games, find small activities to do together, and basically use anything they can think of to keep their minds occupied. Eventually, Christmas arrives. Despite everything happening around them, the trapped families refuse to let the holiday disappear completely. That night, people throughout the neighborhood celebrate from inside their own houses. They can't visit each other, share food, or gather in the same room, but they still acknowledge one another through their windows, turning the strange situation into the closest thing they can manage to a neighborhood Christmas celebration. Much later, Ruth and Gary are sitting together when Ruth suddenly notices movement outside. She looks through the rain and sees something that instantly frightens her. A strange creature is standing out there. It doesn't look like any normal animal, and Ruth is convinced she's staring at some kind of monster. Gary looks outside as well, but he's confused by what his sister claims to be seeing. Around this point, another smaller problem is starting to wear the family down. They've been eating the same limited meals again and again, and the children are getting sick of it. During dinner, Ruth mentions the creature she saw outside. Strangely enough, she doesn't describe it as dangerous. She actually believes the monster seemed friendly. Jason dismisses the idea immediately. He tells Ruth she was probably tired, scared, or imagining things after spending so much time trapped inside. Ruth doesn't take that very well and becomes visibly upset. Danny quickly changes the mood by surprising everyone with homemade cookies. For a few minutes, the tension disappears, and the family gets to enjoy another small piece of normal life. Later, once Ruth and Gary have gone to sleep, Jason and Danny finally get a little time alone. They're sitting together watching Air Force One, one of the only movies available to them. The problem is that Danny has now seen it so many times that she can barely enjoy it anymore. Still, the two settle in together and try to make the best of the evening. Then something outside catches their attention. Animals are casually moving through the neighborhood. With every human being trapped indoors, wildlife has slowly started reclaiming the streets. Creatures that normally would have avoided the houses are now wandering openly through the area without anyone around to frighten them away. The following day, the family exchanges Christmas presents. None of the gifts are actually new. They're simply old items they found around the house and wrapped up for one another. But surprisingly, nobody seems to care. After everything they've been through, the simple act of opening presents gives them something positive to focus on, and everyone genuinely enjoys the moment. There is good news elsewhere in the house as well. Danny's tomato plants have finally begun to grow. It's only a small development, but seeing something alive and producing food gives the family a little more hope about surviving in the long term. That hope doesn't last. Not long afterward, Ruth looks toward the Richardson house and notices that Mrs. Richardson appears extremely sick. Her condition continues getting worse. And before long, she dies. The sight is devastating for Jason and his family. Jason had already suspected that she might not make it, especially after learning that the Richardsons had run out of food. But watching someone in the house across the street slowly die makes the danger suddenly feel much more immediate. They are no longer simply trapped. People can actually die here, and there is nothing anyone can do to reach them. It forces Jason to confront a thought he has been trying to avoid. Eventually, the same thing could happen to someone in his own family. Around the same time, another problem starts developing inside the house. Jason realizes that the medication his dog, Carrie, depends on is almost completely gone. He becomes increasingly worried and spends as much time as possible beside the dog, doing whatever he can to keep Carrie comfortable. But without more medicine, there isn't much he can actually do. A few nights later, Ruth stays awake looking after Carrie. While sitting near the window, she suddenly notices someone standing outside. It's Ava. The neighbor who escaped on the first day has somehow returned. Ruth immediately alerts everyone. Jason, Danny, and Gary rush toward the window and stare outside in disbelief. Ava looks terrified. She is desperately trying to get their attention and begging them to let her into the house, but there is still no way to open anything. Then Ava begins screaming a warning. She tells them that someone, or something, is going to kill all of them. Before she can explain what she means, a huge shadow appears behind her. Everyone inside freezes. A gigantic creature steps forward from the darkness and grabs Ava, and that's when the family notices something even worse. It isn't alone. More monstrous figures are moving throughout the neighborhood. There are several of them. Jason and his family can do nothing except watch in horror from behind the glass. Then, without warning, an intense flash of light floods the entire area. For a moment, they can barely see anything. When the light finally disappears, the neighborhood is empty again. Ava has vanished. The creatures have vanished too. There is no sign that any of them were ever standing there. Everyone inside is badly shaken by what they've just witnessed. Jason immediately lays down a new rule. From now on, nobody is supposed to spend unnecessary time near the windows. Whatever is outside is clearly dangerous, and he doesn't want his family drawing attention to themselves. Afterward, they go through Ruth's notes. She has been writing down observations and theories about everything happening outside. Ruth explains that this wasn't the first time she had seen one of those creatures. She reminds them about the monster she spotted earlier and continues insisting that at least one of them did not seem hostile. Jason refuses to accept that possibility. As far as he's concerned, something that looks and behaves like those creatures cannot be trusted. He tells Ruth that there is no reason to believe any of them are friendly, and the safest thing they can do is stay as far away from the monsters as possible. Jason then reassures everyone that, no matter what is happening outside, he will do everything he can to protect them. After witnessing Ava's disappearance, the family changes its sleeping arrangement. Instead of staying in separate bedrooms, Jason, Danny, Ruth, and Gary all begin sleeping together in the same room. Being close to one another makes them feel safer. As more time passes, Jason continues watching what is happening around the neighborhood. He confirms that Mrs. Richardson is dead, and he also notices another nearby family arguing constantly. The isolation is clearly affecting everyone differently. Jason doesn't want Ruth and Gary watching people deteriorate, fight, or possibly die in the houses around them. So he becomes even stricter about keeping the children away from the windows. Then, one day, something unexpected happens. Ruth and Gary are exercising inside the house when a cap suddenly drops down through the chimney. Everyone looks up. Jason checks the opening and realizes something important. The chimney is no longer blocked. For the first time in a long while, they may actually have a possible route outside. Because Ruth is the smallest person in the family, she offers to climb through it. Jason is nervous about the idea, but it's also the first real escape opportunity they've had. He carefully lifts Ruth upward and helps her into the chimney. She slowly squeezes her way higher. Eventually, Ruth manages to reach far enough that one of her hands actually makes it outside. For a moment, it looks like she might be able to escape. Unfortunately, the opening is surrounded by pipes and other structures that leave almost no room for her body to pass through. No matter how she shifts herself, she can't squeeze between them. Jason realizes continuing would only put her in danger. With no other choice, the family carefully lowers Ruth back into the house. Their only promising escape route has failed. Before they can even process that disappointment, they hear Carrie crying. The sound is different this time. The dog is clearly in severe pain. Everyone rushes over and finds Carrie's condition has deteriorated badly. Without the medicine he needs, his body is becoming weaker, and his suffering is getting worse. Jason knows they have reached the point he was afraid of. There is no veterinarian, there is no way to leave the house. And there is no more medication coming. They cannot save Carrie. After discussing it, the family makes an incredibly painful decision. Instead of allowing the dog to continue suffering, Jason decides to put him down. With the rest of the family nearby, Jason tearfully uses his gun to end Carrie's pain. The loss hits all four of them deeply. Carrie wasn't simply a pet anymore. After months of isolation, he had become an even more important part of their small world inside the house. Danny wants to cremate Carrie's body using the chimney. To her, that feels like the respectful thing to do. But Jason looks at the situation differently. Their food supply is shrinking, they have no idea when they'll be released, and they have already watched another family run out of food. He tells Danny they can't afford to waste anything that could potentially help them survive. As horrible as the thought is, Jason wants to preserve the meat in case the family's remaining food eventually disappears. Danny is disgusted by the idea. She doesn't want to imagine eating an animal that had lived with them as part of the family. But their circumstances have changed what choices are available to them. And eventually, despite how much she hates it, Danny realizes she has no real alternative but to accept Jason's decision. More months pass, and by now the family's remaining food is almost gone. One day, Jason notices several wild animals moving around near the house. A stray dog wanders close enough for him to toss a small piece of meat outside. The dog quickly eats it, and as Jason watches, an idea begins forming in his mind. If animals can be drawn toward the house with food, maybe he can use the same basic principle he used while fishing. Instead of waiting for food to somehow appear, he could lure animals close enough to trap them. And if the plan works, it might be the only way to keep his family from starving. Several more months go by, then the rain starts again. The moment the first heavy drops begin falling, everyone moves quickly through the house, shutting the windows before the storm gets worse. But while they're doing this, they suddenly notice something standing outside, one of the creatures. Ruth happens to be nearest to the window. The entire family freezes. Nobody knows whether moving, making noise, or even stepping closer might cause the creature to attack. For several terrifying seconds, it simply stands there. Ruth remains completely still while Jason and Danny watch helplessly from behind her. Then, without making any move toward the house, the monster slowly turns and walks away. Nobody moves until it has disappeared from sight. The instant it's gone, Ruth rushes back toward her family. Only then does everyone finally allow themselves to breathe again. Another 3 months pass. By this point, their food situation has become desperate. There is almost nothing left. Gary and Ruth are constantly hungry now, and the effects are becoming impossible to hide. Their bodies are weakening, their energy is disappearing, and every meal has become smaller than the last. When Dani realizes just how little food remains, the pressure finally overwhelms her. She suddenly collapses. Jason immediately rushes to her side, trying to wake her and make sure she's all right. The situation has reached a point where the family isn't just struggling with hunger anymore. They're beginning to break down physically and emotionally. Still, Jason refuses to let them lose hope. He tells everyone that somehow, in some way, they're going to make it through this. Then Gary walks over carrying something unexpected, the fish from their home aquarium. He has already cleaned and prepared them himself. Gary quietly suggests that they eat the fish rather than allowing them to go to waste. Jason looks at his son and realizes how much the children have changed. Gary is no longer simply waiting for his parents to solve everything. He's beginning to take responsibility for the family's survival too. That small moment gives Jason some badly needed hope. Whatever happens from this point forward, they agree to face it together. Around the same time, Jason checks the piece of meat he previously placed outside. It's gone. An animal has eaten it. That confirms his idea can work. Jason immediately begins constructing a homemade trap using whatever materials he can find inside the house. Once it's ready, he places the trap outside. Every day he checks it. Nothing. He resets it and tries again. Still nothing. For a while the plan seems useless. Then one day it finally works. Jason discovers that the trap has caught a squirrel. It's hardly a huge amount of food, but after months of watching their supplies disappear, even a single animal feels like an enormous victory. Several days later, the family cooks the squirrel and divides the meat between them. For the first time in a long while, there's something worth celebrating. It proves that they might actually have a renewable source of food outside. From there, Jason and Dani decide they need another long-term solution as well. They begin growing more food inside the house. Since ordinary pots aren't enough, they tear open part of the floor and convert the space beneath it into a makeshift indoor garden. They plant whatever they can and try to turn part of their home into usable farmland. Neither Jason nor Dani knows whether it will be enough. They don't even know how much longer they'll remain trapped. But at this point, survival means using every possible option. Outside their home, the rest of the neighborhood has become much worse. Many of the people who were trapped alongside them have already died from starvation. Others are still alive but have clearly lost the will to keep fighting. Some families have simply stopped trying. Jason and his family refuse to do the same. As long as the four of them remain together, they continue pushing forward. Day after day, Jason uses his traps to catch animals that wander close to the property. Whenever he manages to get one, he brings the meat inside and divides it among the family. This becomes their new routine: hunt, grow what they can, preserve whatever remains, and survive another day. Months continue passing in exactly this way. Then one day the electricity shuts off. Nobody is particularly shocked. They always knew the power wouldn't last forever. The only question had been when it would finally disappear. Now that moment has arrived. From this point on, everything becomes even more difficult, and then the story jumps forward. 5 years have passed. Gary and Ruth are no longer children. Both of them have grown into adults while living almost their entire recent lives inside the same sealed house. Outside, the neighborhood looks almost unrecognizable. Most of the people who once lived around them are gone. The streets are empty. The nearby houses are silent. Nature has continued moving while human life has almost completely disappeared. Yet Jason is still doing the same thing he started years ago. He hunts the animals wandering near the property and brings whatever food he can find back to his family. Even after 5 years, his entire life still revolves around keeping the people inside that house alive. Later, Dani gives Jason a haircut. It's a simple moment, but during their conversation she brings up something that's been worrying her. Gary has changed. As he's gotten older, he's become increasingly angry and frustrated with their situation. Being trapped inside the house as a child was one thing. Growing into adulthood without ever being allowed to experience the outside world is something else entirely. Meanwhile, Jason continues improving the systems he's created over the years. His animal traps are no longer the simple handmade devices he started with. He modifies them so they work automatically. Now, whenever an animal triggers one of the traps outside, the mechanism pulls the catch directly into the house. It's another example of how the family has slowly transformed their home into a survival system. A few days later, Dani notices a much more serious problem. The house itself is deteriorating. Cracks and structural damage are appearing more frequently, and certain parts of the building seem to be shifting. She tells Jason that the damage is getting worse. Jason isn't surprised. He explains that rain has been falling almost continuously for 5 years. All that water has been soaking into the soil around and beneath the house. Eventually, the ground underneath them is going to move. And if the situation continues, Jason believes the entire structure could slowly sink into the earth. That creates another terrifying problem. Even if they can keep finding food, the house protecting them may not survive forever. Sometime later, Jason calls everyone into the garage. There, he reveals a project he's been quietly working on. Their old car is running again. Jason has managed to repair it. Gary immediately questions the point. As far as he's concerned, fixing a vehicle inside a house they can't escape makes absolutely no sense. They can't open the garage. They can't drive through the barrier. So why waste time repairing a car that will never leave the property? Jason tells Gary to help him continue working on it. To Jason, the car represents something bigger than transportation. Every year, the family loses more. Their food disappears. Their electricity is gone. The house is deteriorating. The neighborhood has practically died. Jason believes that if they stop maintaining the few useful things they still have, eventually they'll be left with nothing. So even if the car seems pointless right now, he wants it preserved. Gary doesn't see things the same way. The conversation quickly turns into an argument. Frustrated, Gary walks away. After he's gone, Danny speaks privately with Jason. She tells him they can't focus only on food, repairs, and survival anymore. They also have to pay attention to their children. Gary and Ruth aren't little kids now. They're adults who have spent years trapped in a world consisting of only a few rooms and the same 3 people. And even though the whole family still lives under one roof, Danny can feel them becoming more distant from one another. She's afraid that if they keep ignoring it, they'll eventually survive physically while losing their connection as a family. Jason listens without arguing. Deep down, he knows she's right. He quietly agrees that something has to change and begins thinking more seriously about how to bring everyone closer again. Not long afterward, another storm begins moving toward the neighborhood. Heavy rain starts falling once more. Following the routine they've practiced countless times, Jason, Danny, Gary, and Ruth head downstairs and begin securing the house. They close openings, reinforce weak areas, and make sure everything is sealed before the storm becomes too intense. But while the family is busy preparing, movement appears outside. Someone notices it. Standing near the house, surrounded by the rain, is one of the monsters. But this time, something happens that none of them expect. The front door, the same door that has remained completely sealed for years, slowly begins to move. For the first time since the nightmare started, it is opening. Jason immediately realizes something is wrong. He quickly signals for everyone to hide. The family scatters through the house, staying as quiet as possible while they watch the entrance. A few seconds later, the creature steps inside. It pushes the front door fully open and begins moving slowly from room to room. The monster doesn't seem to be rushing. Instead, it carefully searches the house, almost as if it knows people are hiding somewhere inside. As the creature passes through each room, another disturbing effect becomes obvious. An intense cold surrounds its body. The temperature drops wherever it goes, and the freezing air begins destroying the plants Danny has spent years growing. Leaves shrivel, plants collapse. The small garden that helped keep the family alive begins dying right in front of her. Danny can barely stand watching it happen. After everything she did to grow those vegetables, seeing them destroyed within seconds leaves her devastated. Angry and heartbroken, she quietly asks Jason for the gun. Jason hesitates while the monster continues searching through the house. It checks room after room, getting dangerously close to where the family is hiding. Then, without warning, the creature suddenly reacts to a sound coming from outside. It stops, turns toward the entrance, and walks back out of the house. The second it's gone, Gary sees their opportunity. He tells everyone they should run. The door is open. For the first time in years, there is a direct path outside. Gary moves toward it, but Jason immediately grabs him. He refuses to let his son rush into the unknown. Before anyone can argue, the chance disappears. The front door suddenly slams shut on its own. Once again, it becomes completely sealed. They are trapped exactly where they started. Then Ruth notices something on the floor. The creature left water behind as it walked through the house. At first, everyone assumes it's simply rainwater. But Ruth takes a closer look. Something about it is different. She realizes the water is salty. It's seawater. That discovery changes everything. The family rushes back toward the front entrance and tries opening it again, hoping the monster somehow weakened the barrier. Jason pulls at the door. Gary tries helping him. Nothing happens. The door is once again completely impossible to move. Ruth begins thinking about what the seawater might mean. If these creatures are connected to the ocean, maybe they aren't ordinary monsters at all. She starts listing possibilities. Maybe they're something like Leviathan, maybe creatures similar to the Kraken. Perhaps even some unknown version of what humans once imagined as mermaids. Ruth reminds everyone that humanity has explored only a fraction of the oceans, despite the fact that water covers most of the planet. There could be entire forms of life beneath the surface that people have never encountered. And after everything they've witnessed, Ruth begins wondering whether those creatures have somehow taken control of the world. Maybe the planet belongs to them now. Jason looks at his daughter. He refuses to accept that idea. He tells her that this house is still their home, and the world outside belongs to them too. Ruth listens quietly. Then she gives him a small nod. But their situation inside the house continues getting worse. Dani examines the garden and realizes the damage is more serious than she first thought. The seawater tracked in by the creature has contaminated the soil. Salt is spread through the plants, and almost everything she worked so hard to grow is dying. Years of effort are disappearing in front of her. Before they can even figure out what to do next, one of Jason's automatic traps activates. A squirrel has been caught outside. The mechanism pulls the animal into the house. Ruth walks toward it. Normally, catching an animal means food, but this squirrel is terrified. Before Ruth has time to move away, it suddenly lashes out. The animal attacks her and scratches her badly. Ruth screams. Jason and Dani immediately rush over. When they see the wound, both of them panic. Jason reacts without hesitation. He kills the squirrel before it can attack anyone again. At first, they hope Ruth's injury will simply heal, but later that night, her condition begins deteriorating. The scratches become increasingly inflamed. Before long, it's obvious that the wound has become infected. This creates a serious problem. The family's medical supplies are extremely limited, and after years of isolation, almost everything useful has already been consumed. They have only a small amount of clean drinking water remaining. Even worse, they don't have antibiotics. Jason and Dani clean the wound as carefully as possible and try everything they can think of to keep Ruth comfortable, but her fever and weakness continue getting worse. By morning, Jason reaches his breaking point. For years, he has tried to remain calm. He's hunted animals, repaired the house, built traps, maintained supplies, and constantly promised his family that he would find some way to protect them. But now his daughter is seriously sick, and he has no medicine to save her. Jason snaps. He runs to the garage and gets into the repaired car. Then he starts the engine. Without thinking about what might happen, he drives straight toward the garage door. The car slams into it. The door doesn't move. Jason reverses. Then he accelerates again. Another violent impact. Still nothing. He keeps trying, convinced that if he hits it hard enough, eventually something has to break. But the garage door remains sealed. Instead, the car takes the damage. During one of the crashes, Jason loses control and is badly injured. Gary and Dani immediately rush into the garage. They pull him from the damaged vehicle and help him sit down. Jason struggles to catch his breath. For several moments, it looks like his desperate attempt has accomplished absolutely nothing. Then something occurs to him. He remembers what he told Dani earlier. The ground beneath the house has been shifting. Years of non-stop rain have weakened the soil and changed the foundation. If the doors and windows can't be opened, perhaps they don't need to go through them at all. Maybe there's another route underneath the house. Jason begins tearing into the floor. Despite his injuries, he keeps digging. Gary helps him remove debris as they work their way downward. Eventually, Jason breaks through into an empty space. Below the house is a narrow passage connected to the sewer system. For the first time, they've discovered a possible route to another building that doesn't require going outside. Jason tries checking whether he can fit through. He can't. The passage is far too narrow. Dani looks at the opening and realizes she might be able to make it. She volunteers to crawl through. Jason immediately knows where she should go, the Richardson house. Years earlier, Richardson told Jason that he was a dentist. That means there is a good chance he kept medical supplies inside his home, and if anything remains after all this time, there might be antibiotics. Those antibiotics could save Ruth. Dani carefully lowers herself into the passage, then she begins crawling. The sewer tunnel is cramped, dark, and filthy. There isn't enough room to stand, so she has to pull herself forward through the narrow space. Back inside their home, Jason and Gary anxiously wait. Eventually, they realize Dani has successfully reached the Richardson property. For the first time since Ruth became sick, Jason feels a little hope. Inside the Richardson house, Dani finds a horrifying scene. Mrs. Richardson's body is still there. She has been dead for years, and what remains of her has badly decomposed. The house itself is also in terrible condition. Water has flooded much of the interior. Everything that once made it feel like a normal family home has been destroyed. Dani forces herself to continue searching. She doesn't have time to think about what happened there. Ruth needs medicine. Then the rain begins again. Water pounds against the neighborhood as Dani searches through cabinets, drawers, and whatever medical supplies remain. Finally, she finds what she came for, antibiotics. She grabs them immediately. But almost at the same time, she realizes she is no longer alone. Several of the creatures enter the Richardson house. Dani freezes. She cannot fight all of them. Making any noise could get her killed. Holding the medicine tightly, she hides and waits for an opportunity to move. The monsters spread through the house. Dani quietly slips past them whenever their attention turns elsewhere. Step by step, she makes her way deeper into the building until she reaches the basement. She enters cautiously. Then she sees something that completely catches her off guard. Mr. Richardson's body. He is dead too. The sight is so horrifying that Dani instinctively screams. The sound echoes through the basement. Immediately realizing what she's done, she turns and runs. There is no longer any point in hiding. The creatures know someone is inside. Dani races back toward the tunnel. She squeezes into the narrow passage and begins crawling toward her own house as quickly as she can. But before she gets far enough, one of the monsters sees her. It begins following. Dani realizes she can't outrun it inside such a tight space. She pulls out the pistol. Then she turns and fires. The gunshots echo through the tunnel. Back at home, Jason hears the shots. He immediately moves toward the opening. Dani is almost there. Jason reaches down as far as he can. The moment she gets close enough, he grabs her and pulls her upward. Gary helps drag her back into the house, but the danger isn't over. The monster is climbing through the tunnel after her. Jason looks down and sees it approaching. There's no time to close the passage normally, so he grabs whatever heavy material he can find. Rocks and pieces of broken foundation are thrown into the opening. Gary helps him. Together, they dump a pile of heavy debris into the tunnel. The monster keeps climbing. But before it can reach the top, the passage becomes completely blocked. Jason adds more weight until there is no visible opening left. For now, the creature is trapped on the other side. Dani doesn't waste another second. She takes the antibiotics she recovered from the Richardson house and gives them to Ruth. Now all the family can do is wait. Slowly, the medicine begins working. Ruth's infection starts improving. Her fever gradually comes down. Her strength begins returning. And after everything Dani risked to get the medication, it becomes clear that Ruth is going to recover. Seeing their daughter getting better brings an enormous sense of relief to Jason and Dani. For once, their desperate plan actually worked. And after coming dangerously close to losing another member of the family, all four of them finally have a reason to feel hopeful again. Once the immediate danger has passed and Ruth begins recovering, Jason sits down with Dani and tells her something they can no longer ignore. The creatures now know the family is alive. For years, they survived partly because whatever was outside didn't seem to know exactly where they were hiding. That advantage is gone. Jason tells Dani that sooner or later, the monsters are going to return. And this time, he doesn't want to wait helplessly for them. He says that if those creatures are planning to kill the family, then the family has to strike first. Dani understands what he's saying. Soon, Gary and Ruth are brought into the discussion as well. Everyone agrees that hiding forever is no longer an option. Gary points out something important. If the monsters are capable of entering the house, then there must be some way to use that against them. Instead of simply waiting for another attack, maybe they can lure the creatures where they want them and turn the house itself into a weapon. That becomes the family's new plan. They begin preparing for a confrontation they know is eventually coming. Sections of the house are opened up and rearranged. Makeshift barriers are built. Small traps are placed in strategic locations. Anything that can be turned into a weapon is modified and prepared. The idea is simple. Draw the monsters inside, force them into the traps, and somehow use the chaos to get the doors open. For the first time, the family isn't preparing only to survive. They're preparing to fight back. While all of this is happening, Ruth continues taking the antibiotics Dani risked her life to retrieve. Her infection slowly disappears. Her strength returns little by little. Before long, she is finally able to stand and move around normally again. Seeing Ruth recover gives everyone even more determination. Then the day finally comes. Jason decides they're ready. The entire family gathers what they've prepared and moves into position. They take their places near the windows, waiting for the first sign that the creatures are approaching. They don't have to wait long. Almost immediately, water begins forcing its way into the house. It pours in from multiple directions. The lower sections start flooding rapidly. Jason realizes they're witnessing the same thing that happened years earlier inside the Richardson home. Now it's happening to them. But unlike before, the family has prepared for this moment. Nobody panics. They stay close together and begin carrying out the plan. As the water continues rising, Dani spots one of the creatures moving through the house. She reaches for a small explosive device the family built themselves. Then she throws it directly toward the monster. The homemade bomb detonates. Flames spread across the creature's body. Instead of retreating, the monster charges toward them. Jason grabs one of the spears they've prepared and throws it. He misses, the creature keeps coming. Jason immediately reaches for another spear. This time, he gets much closer and drives the weapon into the monster, badly injuring it. But even wounded, the creature refuses to stop. The family retreats upstairs. They lead it toward the storage area where the next part of their plan is waiting. Jason, Dani, Gary, and Ruth move into position. The injured monster follows them. The moment it gets close enough, all four attack together. More spears are driven into its body. At the same time, the creature is already connected to the family's car through several thick ropes they prepared earlier. The monster struggles violently, but the harder it fights, the tighter the ropes become. Its own strength begins working against it. Eventually, the creature loses its footing. Its enormous weight pulls it downward toward the flooded lower section of the house. The ropes tighten further. Now the monster is trapped. It thrashes desperately, but there is nowhere for it to go. For the first time, Jason has one of these creatures completely at his mercy. He steps toward it. After everything his family has suffered, he demands that it open the door. But before Jason can finish what he started, Ruth stops him. She warns her father not to kill it. If this creature dies, they may lose their only chance of escaping. Jason hesitates. Then he studies the monster more carefully. Something has changed. The creature is no longer trying to attack them. It isn't behaving like a predator preparing to strike. It's frightened. Jason can see genuine fear in the way it reacts. And suddenly, Ruth's words from years earlier return to him. She had always insisted that at least one of the monsters wasn't dangerous. She believed some of them might actually be peaceful. Jason refused to believe her, until now. Standing over the injured creature, he finally begins to understand what Ruth had been trying to tell him. Maybe they aren't all the same. Maybe this one never wanted to hurt them. Jason slowly lowers his weapon. The others watch him carefully. Instead of killing the creature, Jason pulls out his knife. He steps closer and begins cutting through the ropes restraining it. One by one, the ropes fall away. The monster is free. Jason then throws the knife aside, making it clear he no longer intends to attack. For several tense seconds, nobody moves. The creature slowly gets back onto its feet. It looks at Jason, then at Dani, then Gary and Ruth. The family has no idea what it's going to do, but rather than attacking, the monster turns away. It walks toward the front entrance. Then, with almost no effort, it opens the door. The barrier that held the family prisoner for years is finally broken. Jason and the others stare at the open entrance in disbelief. After spending so much of their lives trapped inside those walls, they can finally leave. One by one, they step outside. For the first time in years, the entire family is standing beyond the house, but their freedom lasts only seconds. Several enormous creatures suddenly appear around them. The family is surrounded. Before Jason can do anything, the monsters capture all four of them. It seems as though escaping the house has only delivered them directly into an even greater danger. Then the creature Jason spared appears at the entrance. It steps outside and faces the others. Without attacking anyone, it somehow communicates with them. The surrounding monsters immediately respond. They release Jason and his family. Then, one after another, the creatures quietly move away. Jason finally understands. By showing mercy to one of them, his family earned mercy in return. As the danger disappears, they look back at the place that kept them alive for so many years. The house has almost completely sunk into the earth. The unstable ground Jason warned about has finally swallowed most of the structure. But something else has changed too. The rain has stopped. After years of seemingly endless storms, the sky is finally calm. The family looks around at what remains of their town. Almost everything has been destroyed. Homes are abandoned. The neighborhood they once knew is gone. The people who lived around them have either died or disappeared. There is nothing left for them there. So instead of staying, Jason and his family begin collecting whatever supplies they can still use. They search through abandoned homes and gather food, equipment, tools, and anything else that might help them survive. Then they find a boat. After loading their supplies aboard, the family leaves the ruined town behind and begins sailing toward an unknown future. For the first time in years, they are no longer trapped. They don't know exactly where they're going. They don't know what remains of civilization. But they finally have the freedom to search for a new place to live. As they travel, Ruth reflects on everything that happened. She realizes their survival ultimately came down to one decision. They chose not to kill the monster. If Jason had taken its life when he had the chance, the other creatures probably would have killed the entire family. Ruth also comes to understand something else. Maybe the monsters were never simply hunting humans. Maybe they weren't invading the world because they wanted to destroy everyone. Perhaps they were doing exactly what Jason and his family had been doing all these years, trying to survive, trying to protect their own kind, and searching for somewhere they could call home. In that sense, the creatures weren't so different from the family after all. As their boat continues across the water, the radio suddenly comes alive. A voice breaks through the static. Someone else is out there. Another group of survivors is attempting to make contact. Jason and his family listen carefully. After years of isolation, they finally have proof that they are not alone, and with that final sign of hope, the movie comes to an end. The basic idea behind The Last House is probably the strongest thing about the movie. A family wakes up to what should be a normal day, tries to leave the house, and suddenly realizes they can't. The front door won't open. The back door won't open. The windows are sealed, and pretty quickly they realize this isn't just happening to them. Other homes around them seem to be trapped too. That's a great setup. It's simple enough that you understand the problem immediately, but strange enough that your brain starts filling in the blanks on its own. What happened outside? Who's doing this? Why the houses? Why is it raining constantly? And more importantly, is there actually a way out? For the first stretch of the movie, I think that mystery works really well because the film doesn't immediately dump an explanation on you. You're basically stuck with the family, knowing about as much as they do, and that makes the house feel different almost instantly. It's still their home. Same furniture, same rooms, same kitchen, same walls. But once they realize they physically can't leave, everything starts feeling smaller. That part is genuinely unsettling. You can see outside. Freedom is literally on the other side of the glass. You just can't touch it. And honestly, I would have been completely fine if the movie stayed focused on that idea for a lot longer. Because once the family realizes nobody is coming to immediately save them, the story starts becoming less about escape and more about survival. Food starts running out. Resources become important. Normal household items suddenly have value they never had before. And this is where Jason actually becomes one of the better parts of the movie. A lot of people complained about how he suddenly becomes this guy who can build things and solve every problem. But that criticism never really bothered me because the movie establishes that he's an engineer. So yeah, if one person in this family is going to start looking at random equipment around the house and thinking, okay, how can I turn this into something useful? It makes sense that it would be him. Those survival sections are actually pretty fun. Watching him improvise solutions, reuse things, and basically MacGyver his way through different problems gives the movie some personality. It's much more interesting than just watching everybody sit around waiting for something bad to happen. The problem is that the longer the situation goes on, the more the movie starts asking you not to think too hard. And that's where things get messy. Apparently, this family survives inside this house for years. Not days, not a couple of months, years. And once the movie makes that choice, you can't really avoid the logistical questions anymore. Where is all the food coming from? How are they maintaining everything? Where is all this usable soil coming from? What happens to waste? What about medicine? What happens when equipment breaks? How are utilities still functioning after such a long period? Because if electricity, water, or other public systems are still operating years later, somebody somewhere has to be maintaining something. And if civilization outside is functioning enough to keep infrastructure going, then why hasn't anyone figured out what is happening to all these trapped people? But if society has completely collapsed, then why are these systems still working? The movie never really gives you enough to make that part feel solid. And then there are the smaller things that start adding up. It's raining constantly, but the environmental consequences don't always make much sense. Doors and windows seem to have this bizarre ability to seal themselves or recover from damage. But then a chimney becomes a possible escape route. So now you start asking, okay, why does that opening work differently? And once you think beyond this one house, the entire concept gets even more complicated. Did nobody anywhere have a window open when this started? What happens to people living in high-rise buildings? What happens to balconies? Apartments, buildings with different ventilation systems, homes under construction. Obviously, a movie doesn't need to answer every weird hypothetical question somebody on Reddit could come up with. That's not the point. You don't need a 40-minute scene explaining the architecture of every house on Earth, but you do need the central rule of your movie to feel strong enough that these basic questions don't immediately break it. And sometimes The Last House just doesn't have that strength. There are also moments where the screenplay seems to change the rules depending on what needs to happen next. That's the dangerous thing with a mystery like this. At first, not knowing anything is exciting. Later, once the movie starts showing more of what's behind the situation, you naturally expect the rules to become clearer. Instead, the opposite sometimes happens. The creatures arrive. More of the bigger phenomenon becomes visible, but somehow you end up with even more questions. What exactly are these things? Why are they trapping people inside their homes? How are they capable of doing this on such a huge scale? Why this specific method? What's the purpose? And if their goal is something deeper than simply killing people, what are we actually supposed to understand from it? This is where the movie really divides people. Some viewers will say, that's the whole point. You're not supposed to know everything. And honestly, I get that. There is something effective about being trapped in a situation where nobody has the answers. Real fear doesn't always come with a neat explanation. Sometimes uncertainty is the horror. But there's also a difference between mystery and missing information. If a film keeps building its entire story around one massive question, eventually, I need to feel like the filmmakers know the answer, even if they don't tell me every detail. With The Last House, I'm not always convinced they do, and that's frustrating because the original setup really is good. You don't need 20 creatures. You don't need a giant mythology dump. You don't need to explain the science behind every wall and window. The simple version is already enough. A family can't leave their home. Their resources are disappearing. Nobody knows why it's happening. Nobody knows how long it's going to last. And every day, the house that once protected them starts feeling more like a cage. That's the movie I found most interesting. Whenever The Last House sticks to that, it works. Whenever it starts trying to explain the bigger world without having convincing rules underneath it, that's when the whole thing starts wobbling. Because I'm willing to accept an impossible premise. That's what science fiction is for. What I struggle with is when the impossible premise stops following its own logic. And unfortunately, the longer The Last House goes on, the more often that happens. The cast is honestly one of the main reasons this movie stays watchable. Greta Lee and Wagner Moura are both very capable actors, and even when the script is doing things that don't completely work, they still give the family enough credibility that you at least want to see how far they can make it. Moura probably comes out of this the strongest. Jason is easily the most active character in the movie because he's constantly trying to solve something. He's building, fixing, planning, improvising. He doesn't just sit around waiting for the situation to change, and that helps a lot. There were people criticizing how he suddenly seems capable of making all these survival gadgets, but I actually didn't have a huge problem with that. He's an engineer. Out of everyone in the house, he's exactly the person I'd expect to start looking at random tools and household materials and thinking, okay, what can I make out of this? That part feels earned. What doesn't always feel earned is the family itself. And that's strange because the whole movie depends on you believing in these relationships. We're supposed to accept that these people are trapped together for years, going through hunger, fear, boredom, illness, and basically every kind of emotional pressure you can throw at a family. You would expect those relationships to become the heart of the film. Sometimes they do. There are scenes where the parents genuinely feel like two people trying to keep their children alive while also trying not to completely fall apart themselves. And when the movie slows down enough to let that happen, it can be pretty effective. But other times, the family chemistry feels weirdly flat. You know they're related because the movie tells you they're related, but you don't always feel that lived-in connection. There are moments where they come across more like four characters placed in the same house than people who have actually spent years caring about each other. That's a problem when the emotional stakes are supposed to carry so much of the movie. If I don't fully buy that these people love each other, then every sacrifice, argument, and dangerous decision loses a little weight, and the kids are probably where the writing feels weakest. Some people found them realistic because, yeah, kids are going to make dumb choices, especially in a situation this extreme. They're scared, confused, and growing up inside something completely abnormal. So I can forgive a lot of impulsive behavior, but there are also moments where they feel less like real children and more like plot devices designed to create another problem for the parents. That's when it gets frustrating. There's a difference between a child making a believable mistake and a character doing something ridiculous because the movie needs the next scene to happen. The chimney situation is a good example. You can understand why desperation would push a family toward risky ideas, but sending a child into an unknown outside environment is such an extreme choice that instead of worrying about what might happen, you start thinking, why would any parent agree to this? And once you're asking that, the suspense takes a hit. Greta Lee is also a pretty divisive part of the movie. Some viewers thought she was great, very grounded, very natural, and believable as a mother trying to hold everything together. Other people found her character frustrating or just too bland to connect with. I think the issue is probably less about her ability and more about what the script gives her. Moura has a clear function. He's the problem solver. He's always doing something. Greta Lee's character is more dependent on emotional material, and if the family drama isn't working for you, her performance has less to grab onto. There is also a weird criticism around Moura's accent and voice changing in different scenes. That wasn't something everyone noticed, obviously, but for people who did, it became distracting. And that's kind of the story of this whole movie. A lot of the problems are small individually, but there are enough of them that once you start noticing things, they become harder to ignore. The bigger issue, though, is character development. This family supposedly goes through years of isolation. Years. That's enough time for people to completely change. Relationships should change. Personalities should change. Habits should change. The way they talk to each other should change. The way the kids see their parents should change. And the movie does show some of that, but not always with the depth you would expect from such a huge passage of time. Sometimes it feels like the film uses a montage to tell you that people have changed instead of really letting you feel the change happening. And that's a missed opportunity because the setup is perfect for character drama. Imagine being unable to walk away from someone for years. Every argument stays in the room. Every resentment stays in the house. There is no going outside to cool off. No work, no school, no friends, no real privacy. You are stuck with the same people and the same walls day after day. That should create incredible emotional tension, and occasionally it does. The pandemic comparison becomes pretty obvious here too. The movie definitely brings back that feeling of being confined in one place and watching normal routines slowly lose meaning. Obviously, what happens in this movie is much more extreme, but the emotional idea is familiar. People get restless. They make irrational decisions. Small disagreements become bigger because there is nowhere to escape from them. The house starts feeling smaller, even though it hasn't physically changed. That part actually makes some of the family's behavior easier to understand. People like to think they would be completely rational in a survival situation. Most of us probably wouldn't be. Add hunger, fear, and years of uncertainty, and even smart people are going to make bad decisions. So I don't think every irrational moment automatically equals bad writing. Some of it feels human. The problem is knowing where human irrationality ends and screenplay convenience begins. The movie doesn't always get that balance right. The family drama also seems to be where viewers split the most. Some people thought it was the emotional core of the entire movie. They were rooting for Jason and his wife the whole way. They cared about the kids. They found the story surprisingly heartfelt. For those viewers, the creatures are almost secondary. The real point is watching this family stay together. Other people wanted the exact opposite. Less arguing, less domestic conflict, more aliens, more action, more danger outside the house. And honestly, both reactions make sense because the movie itself never completely decides which one it wants to prioritize. Is this a family drama with a science fiction threat? Or is it a science fiction survival movie that spends too much time on family drama? Depending on your answer, you could watch the exact same scene and either think it's important or think it's wasting time. Then there's the animal material. This is where the emotional side of the movie gets a lot more uncomfortable. The film clearly wants to talk about how humans treat other living creatures. There are ideas here about compassion, survival, nature, and the fact that the planet doesn't belong only to us. That's probably one of the clearest themes in the movie. We are not alone here. Animals matter. Nature matters. How we behave toward other life matters. And if that's what the movie is going for, I understand why animal suffering becomes part of the story. But that doesn't mean everyone is going to be okay watching it. Some people found those scenes completely unnecessary and upsetting enough that they stopped the movie. And that's worth mentioning because it's not just a small background detail. If you're sensitive to animal cruelty, this movie may be a rough watch. The strange thing is that the movie seems to be using that discomfort to support a message about compassion. Whether that works for you is going to be very personal. The theme itself is pretty clear. Live with some empathy, care about other people, don't treat nature like it's just there for us to use. Understand that every living thing is sharing the same world. Those are good ideas. The question is whether the movie develops them naturally enough. Sometimes it does. Other times it feels like you're trying to connect the dots after the movie is already over. And that's really where I land on the characters and emotional side of The Last House. The actors are better than the writing in a lot of scenes. Moura gives the movie energy. Greta Lee gives it some emotional grounding. There are moments where the family feels genuinely vulnerable and worth rooting for, but the script doesn't always give these people enough depth to justify how much time we spend with them. And for a movie that is basically trapping us in a house with one family for years, that matters. You don't just need to believe they can survive together. You need to believe they actually belong together. Visually, The Last House is honestly a lot better than the script sometimes deserves. There are plenty of things you can criticize about this movie, but the atmosphere isn't really one of them. The house feels convincing as a place where people could slowly lose their minds. At the beginning, it still looks like a normal family home. Familiar rooms, familiar lighting, everything pretty ordinary. But as the situation gets worse, the space starts changing with them. The plants take over more. The environment feels wetter, stranger, more enclosed. And because the movie spends so much time in one location, that visual progression really matters. If the house looked exactly the same for 2 hours, this would have been exhausting. Instead, the production design keeps giving the place a slightly different personality as time passes. Sometimes it feels like shelter. Sometimes it feels like a greenhouse. Sometimes it feels like a prison. And toward the later parts, it almost feels like the house itself has become part of whatever is happening outside. That's probably one of the better choices in the movie. The cinematography is also pretty strong. There are shots involving rain, water, and sunlight that look genuinely beautiful, especially considering how bleak the story is supposed to be. The lighting does a lot of the heavy lifting too. You can feel the difference between the early stages, when the family still thinks this might be temporary, and later, when the house feels like this weird closed ecosystem they've been forced to accept. There are moments where the movie looks much more thoughtful than it actually is, and I don't mean that as an insult to the cinematography. I mean the visuals are sometimes suggesting a richer movie than the screenplay is giving us. You get this moody shot with rain running down the glass, light cutting through the room, plants covering parts of the house, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, this is actually kind of haunting. Then somebody starts talking and the scene loses half of its power. That's where the filmmaking gets frustrating, because for every element that works, there's another one fighting against it. The narration is probably the clearest example. I never really understood why the movie needed it. The voiceover has this soft, almost reflective quality that doesn't always fit what we're watching. There are moments where the family is dealing with something horrible, and the narration sounds like it belongs in a quiet family drama. It doesn't make the scene more emotional, it just makes the tone feel slightly off. And the stranger part is that the narration sometimes seems to create confusion instead of clarity. At one point, we're apparently told that people around them are dead, and then we see neighbors who seem very much alive. Now maybe there's some interpretation behind that. Maybe it's about timing. Maybe it's supposed to be unreliable. But the movie doesn't really make that clear enough. So instead of thinking, interesting, why is the narrator contradicting what we're seeing? You start thinking, did nobody catch this in the edit? That's not where you want the audience's brain going. And the music has a similar issue. There are scenes where the soundtrack works really well. When the film leans into silence, ambient sound, and that feeling of being cut off from the outside world, the mood can be very effective. The rain becomes part of the soundscape. The quiet inside the house becomes uncomfortable. You start listening for little noises because the movie has trained you to expect something strange. That's good suspense filmmaking. But then you'll get a music cue that feels emotionally disconnected from the scene. Something terrible is being discussed, and the score gives off this almost warm, nostalgic feeling. Not creepy nostalgia, just wrong mood. And sure, horror movies use cheerful music over dark scenes all the time. That contrast can be really effective when it's intentional. Here, sometimes it just feels like the music and the scene didn't have the same meaning. There's also that family fun sequence with the cure. I understand what they're trying to do. These people have been trapped for so long that they need to create normal moments. They need music. They need routines. They need to pretend they're still a normal family for 5 minutes. That's actually a good idea, but the way it's presented can feel a little forced. Instead of being a genuinely spontaneous family moment, it has that, look how quirky and human we are energy. Maybe it'll work for some people. For me, it felt slightly staged. And then there's the dialogue. This is probably where the direction and editing hurt the actors the most. A lot of scenes move through conversation way too quickly. Someone says something important, immediate reaction, cut, next line, cut, another piece of information, cut again. Nobody seems to sit with anything. They barely have time to process what they just heard before the movie moves on. And real people don't talk like that, especially in a crisis. If somebody tells you something completely insane, you don't instantly reply with the perfectly useful next sentence. Sometimes you stare at them. Sometimes you don't know what to say. Sometimes you repeat the question because you think you heard them wrong. Those little pauses are where performances become believable, and The Last House doesn't always allow that. There were moments where I didn't think the actors were giving bad performances. I thought the movie was cutting away before they had the chance to give a performance. That's a big difference. You could probably remove a decent amount of material from this film and still make the individual scenes feel less rushed. which sounds contradictory, but it really isn't. The movie can be too long overall and still move too quickly inside certain conversations. Cut the repetitive stuff. Cut some of the family arguments that aren't adding anything new. Cut exposition we already understand. Then give the important scenes an extra 5 seconds to breathe. That would help a lot. Because right now, the film has this weird rhythm where the overall story sometimes drags, but individual dialogue scenes feel edited like short-form content. Everything has to keep moving. Nobody gets to think. And that makes some of the emotional moments feel manufactured instead of lived in. The direction is kind of the same story. Louis Leterrier clearly knows how to make a movie look polished. There are well-staged sequences. The camera moves confidently. The house is used creatively. Some of the suspense scenes are genuinely effective. And when the movie finally becomes more physical in the later sections, the direction handles the larger scale pretty well. The special effects are also decent. Some people even thought they were one of the stronger parts of the film. The creatures don't always feel original, but technically, the effects mostly do their job. You understand what you're looking at. They fit into the environment. The movie doesn't suddenly look cheap the second something supernatural appears. That's worth giving it credit for, especially because the film doesn't feel like it has an unlimited blockbuster budget. A lot of the scale is created through suggestion. You don't need to watch 20 cities collapse. You understand that something huge is happening because of what this one family is experiencing. That's smart. The problem is tone. The movie keeps shifting between psychological drama, science fiction, creature thriller, family story, and environmental parable. Again, there is nothing wrong with mixing genres. Plenty of great movies do that. But here, you can sometimes feel the transition instead of simply experiencing it. One scene wants you to sit quietly with the emotional pain of this family. The next wants you to think about the mystery. Then we move into survival mechanics. Then the creatures become important. Then we're back to family conflict. Then suddenly, the movie wants to say something bigger about humanity and nature. It's a lot, and the editing doesn't always smooth those changes out. Sometimes the film feels assembled rather than flowing, like all the pieces are technically connected, but you can still see where somebody glued them together. That's probably why the movie's atmosphere is so much more consistent than its storytelling. The atmosphere knows what it wants. The rain, the trapped house, the changing environment, the weird silence. The feeling that something outside is watching or waiting. That stuff works. The narrative construction is much less confident. It explains too much in places where mystery would help, then refuses to explain things that actually need clarity. It rushes conversations, then lets less important sections drag. It has actors capable of carrying quiet scenes, then keeps cutting between their lines. It creates strong visual metaphors, then sometimes buries them underneath dialogue. And that's what makes the filmmaking here so strange. There are moments where I genuinely thought, this is really well made. Not 5 minutes later, I'd be wondering why a scene was edited that way. The movie can look expensive and feel clumsy at the same time. It can create tension through lighting, and then kill that tension with narration. It can give you a beautiful image, and immediately follow it with dialogue that sounds like it was written just to explain the plot. That's The Last House in a nutshell. The craft is there. You can see it. The cinematography works, the location works, the lighting works, a lot of the sound design works, the production design definitely works. But those things are constantly trying to pull the movie forward, while the writing and editing keep tugging it sideways. And honestly, that's probably why I stayed interested even when the story started losing me. Even when I wasn't buying what the movie was saying, I still wanted to look at it. The pacing in The Last House is one of those things where I completely understand why people are split. Because somehow the movie can feel too slow overall and too rushed inside individual scenes at the same time. The first half is where most of the complaints come from. A lot of the movie is just the family adjusting, arguing, trying to survive, figuring out what they can use, what they can't use, what is changing around the house. And if you're into that kind of slow-burn survival setup, there's actually quite a bit to enjoy. You get time to sit with the mystery. You get that weird feeling of not knowing how long this is going to last. The house starts feeling more oppressive the longer you're in it. That works. But if you're waiting for the horror side of the movie to really kick in, then yeah, the first half can feel long, very long. Especially because the movie is almost 2 hours, and there are stretches where it feels like the story is just holding the creatures back because it doesn't know when to bring them in. That's the main issue with the genre balance. What exactly is this movie? A horror film, a sci-fi survival story, a family drama, a psychological thriller, a creature movie? It keeps moving between all of those, and depending on what you expected going in, that either makes it interesting or really frustrating. If you saw the marketing and expected a full-on horror movie, I can see why you'd be disappointed. There honestly isn't that much traditional horror here. It's not built around jump scares. It's not constantly trying to frighten you. The creatures aren't attacking every 10 minutes. For a long time, the scary part is just the idea of being trapped and not knowing why. Some people will like that. Other people are going to say, okay, but where's the actual horror? And I think that's fair. The movie probably works better if you approach it as a suspenseful family survival story with horror elements, rather than expecting something like A Quiet Place where the threat is constantly hanging over every movement. That's where the comparison really hurts The Last House. In A Quiet Place, the rules create tension almost immediately. You know sound is dangerous, so every small noise matters. You're watching characters walk across a floor and you're nervous because the movie has taught you exactly what can happen. Here, the rules are much less clear. So even when danger is present, you don't always know what you're supposed to be afraid of. And that makes the tension less physical. You don't get that same feeling of holding your breath with the characters. The movie is more about uncertainty, which is fine, but uncertainty only carries you for so long before you start wanting something more concrete. And then the creatures finally become a bigger part of the story. This is where the movie changes. The first half is mostly psychological. The second half becomes more like a conventional sci-fi creature thriller. And I don't think that transition is completely smooth. Actually, I think this is where the movie loses some of what made the setup interesting. The idea of a family being trapped in a normal house for years is already weird enough. You don't really need to pile too much mythology on top of that. Once the creatures become more visible, the mystery gets smaller. Before you see them, your imagination is doing a lot of the work. You're wondering what kind of force could possibly seal entire homes. You're wondering whether it's alien, environmental, supernatural, something else entirely. Then the movie starts giving you answers, or at least partial answers, and the threat becomes more familiar. Some viewers even compared the creatures visually to Predator, and that's not necessarily because they're identical or anything like that. It's more that once you reveal the monster, it suddenly feels like something from a movie you've already seen. That's always the risk. The unknown version is usually scarier. The actual creature has to be good enough to replace all those possibilities in your head. I'm not sure The Last House quite gets there. At the same time, there are people who wanted way more of the creatures. More attacks, more chases, more survival sequences, more moments where the family is actually forced to fight or escape, and I get that too. Because if you're going to introduce this big outside threat, you probably want it to feel like a major part of the story. Instead, the family drama gets a lot more screen time. So you end up with this strange situation where one group thinks the creatures take over too much, and another group thinks they barely show up enough. That's probably a sign the balance isn't fully working. The movie is trying to satisfy two completely different audiences, people who want a contained psychological drama, and people who want a sci-fi monster movie. You can do both. But you have to make one naturally grow out of the other. Here, it sometimes feels like the movie changes lanes. You spend all this time watching the family adapt to isolation, then suddenly the story wants to become bigger, louder, and more physical. The third act is where that really happens. And again, reactions are all over the place. Some people thought the last act was the best part. It gets more intense. There is more immediate danger. The stakes feel bigger. The movie finally starts moving with a little more urgency. After such a long build-up, that can be satisfying. You finally get payoff. Things happen. The family is pushed harder. The visual effects get more involved. The threat is no longer just theoretical. For some viewers, that's exactly what the movie needed. But for others, the third act is where it completely falls apart, because the movie trades the strange, claustrophobic tension of the earlier sections for something much more familiar. CG creatures, survival action, bigger set pieces, more conventional genre beats, and personally, I think that's where the movie becomes less interesting, not necessarily worse on a technical level, just less unique. The best part of the premise is how small it is. One family, one house, no way out, that's enough. You don't need to turn it into a giant monster spectacle for it to feel important. In fact, the more the movie expands, the less intimate it becomes. And intimacy was one of the things it had going for it. That's also why the runtime becomes more noticeable. If you're going to spend nearly 2 hours slowly building a mystery, the final act has to make that patience feel worth it. Some viewers clearly felt it did. Others felt like they waited all that time just to end up in a much more generic movie. That's a rough trade. You give up the part people found original and replace it with the part they've seen before. The pacing also gets weird because the middle can feel stretched, but once the movie gets closer to the finale, things start happening very quickly. So you almost get two different rhythms. The first part says, stay here, sit with the family, let the isolation get to you. The final part says, okay, now everything is happening. and that switch can feel pretty abrupt. There's also the question of what kind of fear the movie is even aiming for. Some people said there was basically no suspense. Others said they were on the edge of their seat the whole time. That sounds like a massive disagreement, but I actually think both reactions make sense. If your idea of suspense is waiting for a creature to attack, then the movie can feel empty. If your idea of suspense is watching a family slowly run out of options, then there's plenty of it. The threat changes depending on what you're paying attention to. At first it's the house, then it's hunger, then it's the family itself. Then it's the creatures. The movie keeps changing what danger means. That's interesting in theory, but every time it changes the focus, it risks losing people who were more invested in the previous one. And that's probably the biggest problem with the whole genre mix. There's a version of this movie that goes all in on psychological horror. Keep the creatures mysterious. Focus on the house. Focus on time. Focus on the family slowly adapting to something they can't understand. That could have been really disturbing. There's another version that goes all in on sci-fi survival. Introduce the creatures earlier. Establish the rules. Give us more encounters. More action, more strategy. That could have been fun too. Instead, the last house sits somewhere in the middle. Sometimes that makes it unpredictable. Sometimes it just makes it feel indecisive. And by the third act, you can really feel the movie trying to give everyone something. More action for the people who were waiting, more emotional stakes for the family drama, more creature mythology, more visual spectacle, more explanation, more danger. It's a lot to cram into the ending. And I think that's why the final stretch can feel exciting and disappointing at the same time. It's definitely more intense, it's definitely more active, but I don't know if it's actually more interesting. That's the difference. The movie gets bigger. I'm just not convinced it gets better. What The Last House is actually trying to say is probably more interesting than the way it finally says it. There are clearly ideas here about family, community, nature, compassion, and the way humans treat other living things. You can feel the movie reaching for something bigger than just a family gets trapped in a house and weird creatures show up. The whole story seems to be pushing toward the idea that humans are not separate from the world around them. We share it with animals, with nature, with each other. And maybe the movie wants us to think about how differently we would behave if we were suddenly the ones being controlled, trapped, observed, or treated like we weren't the most important species in the room. That part is actually kind of interesting, especially when you connect it to the family's treatment of animals and the way survival slowly changes what they are willing to do. You can read the film as saying that compassion matters even when you're desperate, that how you treat other living things eventually says something about who you are. Maybe even that kindness has consequences. The problem is, I'm not sure the movie communicates any of this clearly enough while you're actually watching it. A lot of the meaning seems to arrive after the fact. You finish the movie, sit there for a second, and start trying to connect everything yourself. Okay, was this about nature? Was this about humans being punished? Was this about coexistence? Was it just about family? Was there supposed to be some kind of moral test? And that's not automatically bad. I like movies that leave room for interpretation. I don't need a character to look directly into the camera and explain the theme. Please don't do that. But there's a difference between leaving space and leaving the audience to assemble the movie for you. And The Last House gets pretty close to that line, which brings us to the ending. Yeah, this is where the movie is going to lose a lot of people. Some viewers really liked it. They found it hopeful, emotional, even satisfying in a strange way, and I can see that reading. After spending so much time watching this family suffer, the ending does give you a kind of release. There's something emotional about finally feeling that all of this pain might lead somewhere other than total destruction. If you're mostly invested in the family, that may be enough. You don't necessarily need every creature explained. You don't need a diagram showing how the houses were sealed. You just want to know what all of this meant for these people. And emotionally, the movie does try to give you that. But if you've spent the entire runtime waiting for the mystery to actually come together, the ending can be incredibly frustrating, because the big questions are still sitting there. Why were people trapped in the first place? Why these houses? Why for so long? What exactly are the creatures? What do they want? Why does the situation end the way it does? What changed? What were the actual rules? And the movie doesn't really give you a clean answer. Now, some people will call that ambiguity. Other people are going to call it unfinished writing. And honestly, I think the movie gives both sides enough ammunition. That's why the ending is so divisive. It doesn't feel like a simple case of you either get it or you don't. It feels more like the movie is asking you to decide how much explanation you personally require before symbolism starts feeling like an excuse. For me, the emotional idea is there. The logical payoff is much weaker. And that's a tough combination in a movie that spends so much time building mystery. If you spend nearly 2 hours asking the audience to wonder why something is happening, eventually, maybe it's about compassion, isn't going to satisfy everyone. The theme can support the answer. It can't completely replace one. There is also the possibility that the ending is intentionally leaving room for another movie. I can absolutely see how this could become a bigger story. There's still a lot left unexplored: the larger world, the creatures, what happened to other people, how the whole phenomenon works, whether humanity learned anything from it. There is definitely sequel material sitting there. And honestly, another film could probably make this first one more interesting if it actually develops those ideas. But I don't love defending an ending by saying, maybe the sequel will explain it. The movie still has to work now. A future installment can add context. It shouldn't be required to finish the homework. And I think that's where expectations become really important with The Last House, because people seem to go into this movie expecting completely different things. If you saw the trailer, saw Greta Lee, saw Wagner Moura, saw Louis Leterrier's name and thought, okay, this is going to be a smart, serious sci-fi thriller, then I can understand why the movie might disappoint you. The marketing makes the concept look huge. The cast makes you expect strong character writing. The mystery makes you expect a satisfying explanation. And when those things don't fully arrive, the gap between expectation and reality becomes part of the criticism. Some viewers came out feeling like Netflix sold them something more ambitious than the movie actually was, but then there are people who went in completely blind. No trailer, no reviews, no idea what the movie was even about. And a lot of those reactions were noticeably more positive. That makes sense. If you press play expecting nothing more than a strange survival thriller, you're much more likely to accept what it gives you. You enjoy the house. You enjoy the mystery. You enjoy Moura solving problems. You get a few emotional moments. Some creatures show up. Movie ends. Not everything needs to become a masterpiece. Sometimes a movie really can just be a decent Friday night watch. Popcorn, turn your brain down a little, go with it. And if that's your approach, The Last House probably works better. There are enough good-looking scenes. The cast is strong enough. The concept is unusual enough. There's enough tension to keep things moving for most of the runtime. You can absolutely watch this, enjoy parts of it, and never think about the window logic again. But that's also kind of the problem. The movie keeps inviting you to think. The setup invites questions. The long timeline invites questions. The creatures invite questions. The ending definitely invites questions. So telling the audience to just switch their brain off doesn't completely fit the kind of movie this is trying to be. It wants to be more than disposable entertainment, at least sometimes. And I think that's why the negative reactions are so strong. People aren't angry because the movie had nothing going for it. They're angry because it had a lot going for it. Good cast, good premise, strong atmosphere, interesting survival mechanics, some genuinely effective emotional ideas, a solid visual identity. All the pieces are sitting right there, and yet the movie never quite turns them into something as memorable as it should have. That's probably the most frustrating thing about The Last House. It's not terrible in a boring way. It's frustrating in a this could have been really good way. There's a better movie hiding inside this one, maybe a shorter version, maybe a stranger version, maybe one that never shows the creatures as much, maybe one that explains them more. I don't know. But there is definitely a version where the family drama, survival story, environmental message, and sci-fi mystery all support each other instead of competing for attention. This version gets close sometimes, and then it drifts away again. So overall, I land somewhere in the middle. I don't think The Last House is the disaster some people are making it out to be. There are genuinely good stretches here. Moura is solid. Greta Lee has some strong moments. The house is used well. The atmosphere works. The basic concept had me interested. And even when I was questioning the logic, I still wanted to know where the story was going. That counts for something, but I also can't ignore how many opportunities the movie leaves on the table. The pacing is uneven. The family isn't always developed enough. The world building starts falling apart if you stare at it too long. The creatures make the film feel more familiar instead of more original, and the ending asks for a level of acceptance that the rest of the movie hasn't fully earned. Would I recommend it? Kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you want a really scary horror movie, probably not. If you want airtight science fiction with clear answers, definitely not. If you hate unresolved mysteries, this is going to annoy you. And if animal suffering is a deal breaker, I'd be careful with this one. But if you're okay with a flawed, atmospheric survival movie that has a better idea than execution, there's enough here to make it worth a watch. Just don't go in expecting the movie to explain itself perfectly, because it doesn't, and maybe that's intentional, maybe it isn't. Either way, you'll probably have an opinion by the time the credits roll. And honestly, for a Netflix movie that could have easily disappeared into the algorithm after one weekend, That might be the most interesting thing about it.